The Saints are must-see TV going into the offseason. We've dabbled in this discussion before, but I'm going to lay out the entire case. They are in salary cap purgatory, and yet they're a team that is looking like they could make a serious Super Bowl push in this year's offseason, this year's postseason for the NFL. I am Chad Parsons. He is Jordan McNamara, and welcome to the Footballguys Dynasty Show. And we've talked about it before. You've mentioned that you think this is it for Drew Brees. That I think salary cap wise, the Saints would almost be better off, because if he comes back with what they're paying Taysom Hill, and you have a team that it has a lot of components. However, not a lot of sturdy free agents or guys that are going to be, automatically. I mean, they could save a little bit of money with Emmanuel Sanders. Jared Cook is likely going to be gone and out of there in terms of a contract. But I have never, and I am not a capologist, Jordan, I have never seen a team this far projected over the cap. Obviously, 3 or 4 players not coming back can change all of that. But if you take away Drew Brees and now you have the wild card of Taysom Hill at a minimum, then you have a situation where you can't really have another high-priced, if things go wrong, break-glass quarterback. You'd have to go on the retread market, maybe with a rookie. But they're just in a situation that I find fascinating of this feels like the year, and we're going to start to see major changes in the offseason that are going to cascade to fantasy and dynasty.
Yeah, I think Brees is going to retire was my expectation, and there was some talk. Apparently, I don't know if you remember this. There's I think at the Senior Bowl or at the Senior Bowl, the Pro Bowl, where he was supposed to. I think it was Russell Wilson was supposed to start, and he basically gave his ceremonial start to Brees, and it raised some eyebrows. Apparently, at that point, he had said that he was going to retire, and that was a lot of the Saints courting. Sort of behind the scenes courting Brady, for example, right? And that ultimately he changed his mind and came back. So I think he's bordering, and he already has post-career job lined up, and I think he has fallen off of where he was, right? So all those things, I do think he's going to retire at the end of this year, and they have a shot to go out on top. So, we'll see. But I think it's going to be really interesting in terms of they're way over. They're going to be way over.
Even if he's a 0 next year on their cap, that if he retires, they're still going to be right there as number 1, number 2 over the cap, in purgatory team, which is amazing. So even with Brees out of it, I mean, there's 2 or 3 teams out there that it feels like they've been borrowing on credit. And they're like, this is our run. This is our window. And not most of those teams are not going to win a Super Bowl. And I think when you look back in retrospect, if you're not doing diligence every single year, all of a sudden it becomes what did we get out of that window? Like we made a conference title game and we did this, we did that. But it's like you never really got all the way there. You never got home. And you'll have a few banners that are divisional or conference level. And I think the Saints, this feels like the year, and then there might be a little bit of a regeneration here for 2 or 3 years before they get on track.
Yeah, and I was actually reading it over the cap.com. They had an analysis of it, and it required some restructuring in terms of some of the bigger players. It basically factored in Drew Brees being gone, and there's some salary cap machinations that have to go on with that. They cut the calculus was basically they had to cut Quan Alexander, Janoris Jenkins, Emmanuel Sanders, Malcolm Brown, and Nick Easton, a lineman there. So it's not a ton of the fantasy assets actually being moved off, and then they'd have to figure out something to do for like $10 million more, which they speculated to trade. So it doesn't look like it's going to be incredibly damaging. It's not like any of the core fantasy guys outside of Brees, for example, are going to be gone. But what that leaves at quarterback is interesting, right? And I think looking forward, one of the key ones is going to be what the market reaction to a Drew Brees less offense is going to be, particularly for Michael Thomas. And you had Michael Thomas coming into this year on a historic track. You had Michael Thomas coming in this year on in the stages of a Hall of Fame beginning of his career, and has a down season, is hurt, things kind of go sideways for him. And now he's borderline out of the top 10 in startup drafts. top 10 wide receivers. I mean, that to me seems like an overreaction. And, you can vault wide receivers up there. And, we've done this with other guys too, and vault these guys up there. I mean, Amari Cooper was like wide receiver 2-3 in Dynasty at a period in time when he hadn't posted anything better than like a top 15 season. And, and now he has basically sort of settled into being that, and he's undervalued, right? And I sort of think that that's a cautionary thing that we're going to see a lot of these guys get vaulted up. Oh, look, they're young, they're on historic tracks. And then when they don't get there, it ultimately feels disappointing. You look back 24 months later and you're like, oh, that was, he's been a disappointment. Like, we could have seen it coming. So you're going to get a multiple round discount on Michael Thomas. I mean, this seems like a smash. Yes. I actually did look and see the games with and without Drew Brees, and he's had a sizable chunk of games without Drew Brees. Most of them have been with Drew Brees, but I think it's like 16 games or so without Drew Brees. So basically a season worth of games. And he actually outproduced in terms of fantasy points per game. He actually outproduced his Drew Brees games without him. So I do think that there's some evidence there that he's not necessarily hurt by Brees retiring. And I think if that's going to cause a drop in his valuation, I think he's a smash pick in startup drafts.
Yeah, doesn't he feel like this could be the first of a couple different slips, over a couple of years, whether that, is warranted production-wise or not? I mean, the track record is on the not standpoint. And I mean, Mike Evans, in terms of we've seen it slip for, it seems like 2 years now. That's on, I'm not quoting something, but that's the feel of it. And now we're reaching a low-level mark. And we typically see this. I mean, every once in a while, like Antonio Brown, I recall, at 27, 28 was pretty insulated in terms of staying there at the top. And again, that didn't, age super gracefully, but I'm putting that kindly. You're serving this. What would you like, vanilla or chocolate? But I feel like this sweet spot of, wide receivers that are 27, 28, maybe even 29, they get to a point of starting to go late enough where you're like, well, I can, cross-reference, I can have a couple of these guys. I can mix in, one pedigreed rookie rookie or younger player that I drafted earlier than them. I can pair those things together. I can blend them on my roster. And yet all of them for right now, for the next 1, 2, 3 years are starting for me side by side. And this whole idea of someone retiring off your roster or eroding to the point, I mean, Larry Fitzgerald, you could have rostered him and, all the way through pretty much. And when was the point he was truly irrelevant? I mean, this year was probably the first time he was still in his down years, the last couple, still a flex guy, in terms of lineup consideration. And that was years removed from when the bottom fell out of his value. And it's just, it's one of those reminders that if someone's on a Hall of Fame historic track, really make sure that you have that valued correctly. And yeah, I think you're right to pin it on Michael Thomas and say, I mean, he's the most potentially affected in a negative perspective. Okay, Brees is gone, and then all the like here's what he's been doing. Taysom Hill is not very good, and here's why. And it's going to be now a run centric offense. Sean Payton's gonna meld to what he has, kind of like Bill Belichick with Cam Newton, and there's going to be a lot of things are going to change rapidly. But if Emmanuel Sanders is gone, you say, where's the wide receiver? Where's the wide receiver 2-3 that they've been searching for? Volume, the pedigree, and it seems like no matter what, there's going to be enough insulation on the drop, even if it doesn't drop anymore with the announcement of Brees being gone, that there's enough juice there to say, I'm getting a guy that basically had a down year and, but he was on a Hall of Fame, like good luck touching that first 4 years in the league. And yet, no matter what, I think we're kind of locked into profit potential based on his price entering the offseason.
Yeah, even if you even if you say, hey, let's take off 20% of what he was at his best, I mean, you're still looking at a 125 target guy, right? And when you sort of look at that, you're like, all right, and I don't even think that's outside of injury, I think that's a pretty outlier outcome, right? I mean, that's betting a huge regression that I don't think is going to happen. So I think that's one. And I mean, if you're sitting right now, I mean, we're talking, right before New Year's, who would you project as being their starter? I mean, do you think it's Taysom Hill? Do you think it's Jameis? Like, what do you think it looks like?
Well, the fact that I think if you're comparing those two, I mean, I think you have to go towards Taysom Hill follow the money, right? So Jameis Winston, free agent. They'd have to actually sign him back. Taysom Hill jumps up, and this is the whole. I think this was how they kept him. That hey, Breeze, this could be it for him. We're gonna have you as the next man up, and we're paying you handsomely. I mean, they pretty much, he will be on the team next year unless it's a restructure. I mean, 11 million dead cap, 16 million overall, which you say, that's really affordable for basically anyone that's not in the full reclamation older veteran mode. That's going to go for under 20 million, let's say, or maybe even under 25. I mean, this market is pretty robust, but then there's a big divide between the unprovens and the lock and load, you stay with your team type situation outside of Kirk Cousins. So I mean, to me, a $16 million bet on is he going to be good or not, Taysom Hill, for a full season, and he is our plan. I mean, I think he, at 16 million, he has to be their plan. Now, they might have a hedge. They might have someone that's more prototypical also, like they had this year with Jameis Winston. They may have something like that, but I think if it's not Breeze, I think I would put heavy odds. I don't know. I don't go this high for odds of much of anything, but I would say 70-75% Taysom Hill is their week one plan next year. If you give me the one data point of Drew Brees is not with the Saints anymore.
That is pretty aggressive. That's something that, you're not usually that certain. So that is, I think, notable in terms of it. I would say, I think in terms of like bigger overall stories as we sort of transition out of 2016 out of 2020 into 2021. That's infant dad brain talking for a second there. I do think some of the quarterback things are going to be pretty interesting in terms of like just looking around the NFL in terms of some changes. I mean, there's some talk that maybe Matt Ryan could move on. They're going to have new front office, new coaching staff. Is this a transition year? It seems tough from a cap perspective that they do that, but that's a possibility. Is Teddy Bridgewater back in Carolina, or do they draft somebody? Mitchell Trubisky's a free agent, has played well enough to maybe warrant them bringing him back. It'll be interesting there. Andy Dalton's a free agent, and so is Dak, right? How does that all work out? Denver with Drew Lock. I think one of the bigger ones is Matthew Stafford. And there's so much smoke here to this. Hey, he's going to be potentially on the market. Again, they don't have a front office right now, so you sort of be careful. It's a lot of speculation, but the cap number is absolutely possible, and there's going to be buyers for it. There's going to be demand there. What happens with Rivers in terms of if he's back? He's played well. Is he back? Is he back with Indy? Right? Those things are all up for debate there. And then you sort of look down. The Patriots, the Saints, right? There's a lot of these moving pieces. What do the Giants want to do with Daniel Jones? What do the Jets want to do with Sam Darnold? Right now that they're out of the Trevor Lawrence sweepstakes, is Ben going to retire? Right? All of these, San Francisco, right? You just keep looking down. Washington, right? So there's so many of these stories in Superflex in particular. I think it was a couple of weeks ago, and I just went down and there was like 20 or 22 starters that I felt comfortable with being starters in 2021. And then, with their current team, and then going out, it was like another year. It was even less than that. Right. So it was something like 16, maybe 18 that I felt comfortable with in a 2-year window. And, so that's, I think, a big thing here in terms of how we deal with that uncertainty and how all the chips fall out. It seems like there's going to be, especially with guys like Cam, right? Is he a starting quarterback? Well, if there's not like 32 guys walking around that appear to warrant that tag. So it's going to be an interesting situation. Where does Fitzpatrick land? I think there's going to be so many chips to fall. And it could really shake up valuations big time.
Yeah. Cam Newton, it feels like one, isn't the mantra though, if you flail out of New England, that, maybe they're out of options. So he'll be an interesting one to see if anyone feels like they can Band-Aid him up and get him out there for another quality season. I think part of the reason with Atlanta and Detroit, it feels, because they're both in the top 7 right now. So they're going to be right in that potential QB 2, 3, 4 zone, both of them, to say, even if we're going to roll back, what we have right now as our plan, for this year, it could be one of those hook scenarios of, well, now we have a quarterback of the future, and it kind of starts the clock there. But it's not like Jordan Love back of the first round and you have Aaron Rodgers, an all-timer. You have the tier below. in terms of quarterback play with Matt Ryan and Matthew Stafford. So it does start the clock, but it doesn't mean they have to be technically like Patrick Mahomes, right? I mean, he saw a cameo. Lamar Jackson was the same sort of thing. I mean, so it might depend on the team, where they do turn the page during the year if things don't improve, or once they're out of the playoffs, or, and then they would make a requisite move with their veteran the next offseason or something like that. So I wonder, but it feels like there's, like you were saying, there's smoke to hear. But I'll tell you, I mean, with guys like Ryan and Stafford, to me, it says opportunity, because it's about profiles. It's about, those insulated players that at quarterback that are 29, 30 and into 35, 36. Like, that's sort of the ripe zone. You say, who's going cheap? Who has shown for 3, 4, 5, 8 years that they can play? They can play in this league. I mean, Matt Stafford and Matt Ryan are not going to be tough to find work. I mean, they would be able to glob on. I mean, there's already talk that Washington would be interested in, a veteran quarterback next year. There's going to be, like you said, I mean, there's probably 5 to 10, and whether they have a young quarterback with, you could have someone like Denver, that they have a young quarterback, but they certainly would jump at the chance to maybe upgrade with a veteran. So to me, quarterback is the position to watch in the offseason of just storylines abound. We've had a couple of good off seasons at the position, but this feels like the best one yet in terms of sheer volume of profiles that are on the move potentially.
Yeah. Do you have anyone that you think's like a quarterback to a spot that would really interest you?
Well, again, I mean, I think the profiles of the quarterbacks that could be on the move are the biggest acclaim there. So they would be a rising tide. Like, I really think it would be of interest when you think about, like, here's one thing I was just thinking. So Terry McLaurin, look at what he's done with a career start, and you say, what has he had at quarterback? Answer, not much. So imagine if he actually got connected to a top 10 to 12 guy. The historical finishes for that, if you're a top 8 quarterback, your wide receiver 1 finishes on average wide receiver 12 in fantasy. So you're like an even money. You're like, the odds of you finishing top 12, top 18, all this stuff, like, your floor is so high in that scenario. And you say, is Washington adding somebody that's going to render him the clear number 2? Or are they going to bring in Allen Robinson, or, some of these, one of these big flash signings? Or are they going to, just try to subtly improve the depth chart? But if they upgrade quarterback, I always think about these Allen Robinson changing teams. I mean, is another example of just, if you give someone the best quarterback they've ever had, and yet they've already been good, that's how good becomes great. And so that's what I would be with any of these quarterback shuffles. Who's actually getting a big, substantial stability upgrade at the position? Because that can just, all of a sudden, the tide moves from 3 feet to 5 feet.
Yeah. Do you think Dak's back with Dallas? I
do. I mean, let me ask you this offhand. Neither one of us are historians. Where's Adam Harstead when we need him? Is there Kirk Cousins is really the lone one I can think of where a good quarterback was just like, oh yeah, you can just go. Like, that doesn't happen. That does not happen without a bunch of ancillary reasons. So I would be shocked. And I don't say shocked. I'm shocked by slightly more than you're shocked, which is minimal. So in life, you're like, I can see that. So I just,
for a win, the range of outcomes
for the Cowboys with Dak Prescott to not be on the team next year, that would just floor me, because you just be letting him walk out the door. And I mean, now with them winning games, I mean, they could have had the number 3 pick in the draft, but they've been on this 3-game win streak, and all of a sudden now, I mean, they're in the teens. So that might shade them. I mean, I think I was talking on some, draft dialogue, lets me enter down the path. And it's like, well, Dallas is way up there as of a few weeks ago, that especially with all these other teams winning, that so that would be one thing that, and we've talked before, Dak Prescott with the Cowboys, just, there's so much upside in that passing game. But if you take him out and all of a sudden it's a rookie, or if it's a retread, that changes the entire calculus of all those. Let's build around this offense and all these skill position, investments. And now you don't have the quarterback cornerstone. I don't know. That feels like malfeasance and malpractice of team building when you let the guy that you had and developed get out the door.
Yeah. Just think how good that offense is when top 10 dynasty asset CeeDee Lamb is your wide receiver 3. I mean, that's a pretty good
Right.
collection of
Yeah,
weapons.
Michael Gallup's pretty good, is he not? I mean, he just
he
continues
is
to show
very good.
well.
Yeah.
And it was a funny thing, like when I was evaluating him in the offseason of like, okay, where is he? And that was after CD Lamb. Like it was during the summer and CD Lamb was already drafted. So you're like, well, you get these tea leaves here that, I mean, in 2 years, Gallup's probably not the guy there. I mean, you just have to deductive reasoning here. I mean, Lamb would almost assuredly be there, and we'll see about Cooper. But Gallup was one where it's like if you run the comps and sort of the historical career arc, you're like, this guy is a monster. Especially when you consider the cost that like nobody values him like a first round rookie pick. No one. It's like you could probably get him for a late second. And you're like, so I don't know how this works out in the short term. Who gets what targets or whatever. But you're seeing he's sort of saying, I'm here. You got to feed me. Feed me Seymour, how the line goes. So who knows how this works out? Does he go somewhere else and get paid $12-15 million a year when his contract is up? Is something that Amari Cooper ends up moving on, and they retain Gallup. But it's a good problem to have. Again, the focal point's the quarterback, because I remember, they were all top 25 or 30 the opening month of the season with Dak Prescott. And now that's shifted where basically no one has been in the top 25 or 30 since Dak left. And that just shows the difference. And Andy Dalton's no slouch. He just threw for almost 400. So, but the aggregate of that loss at quarterback just shows how much the production for strong targets can change. I wanted to mention another observation, storyline, outcome of this year this is more every year. But the carnage this year at running back with injuries, with storylines. Think of all the things that changed between the NFL draft and week 1 in terms of players changing teams. And we see that, yes. But not often do you have Dynasty running back 1 and 2 missing, basically lost seasons between Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley. So 2 gut punches. And I don't know about you, Jordan. I mean, Yes, I probably would have had better outcomes, total points titles, or, hey, I finished 3rd, but I would have finished 1st or whatever. But the number of teams where I lost Barkley or I lost McCaffrey, now I wasn't in any where I lost both. So that probably would have been a game changer. But I was surprised, and we talk about the impact of one player. I mean, it's not insurmountable. I mean, you can persevere. And that's why if you have multiple backups at running back that, hey, I need help here. You may not have Christian McCaffrey for more than a few games this year. You may not have Saquon Barkley after week 1, but both of them being out with lost seasons. And the interesting thing, I think you mentioned this in the last month on this show, to some extent, of Christian McCaffrey, we're seeing he is insulated on where he's going to likely go in January. And then Barkley, not so much. I mean, it's crazy to say the phrase Saquon Barkley round 2 startup pick, but that's within the range of outcomes in some leagues, right?
Yeah, I think the whole top of the draft is going to be interesting, because it's going to be the fascinating part about McCaffrey is going to be you basically lost a season from a guy, and he might park himself in as the best non-quarterback in a startup draft, and you sort of like I'm not saying it's scary, but it's not like you feel great about it either. You know what I mean?
He did post 30 points per game when he did play. So
that's certainly fair. That's certainly fair. But I think it's an interesting,
right?
It's an interesting difference there with Barkley. And, and I sort of look at Barkley like, all right, he had the huge year as a rookie and basically finished his running back 2 just behind McCaffrey, basically a touchdown pass by McCaffrey difference in terms of Barkley being the RB1 as a rookie. And last year he misses some time, and I think he finishes as running back 10. So good season, not great. It was the ankle injury, sort of hobbled around for a while. And this year's a total lost year. So you're basically going with
on spec a little bit.
Yeah, with almost 24 months of what you would consider, quote, disappointment. And what does that do? And so now you look, all right, like he still has, and the more and more I look at players, I'm really, especially at running back, I look at players in terms of their commitment level, right? Like how much security, how much stability they have in terms of whether that's contract, or age, or, what they're bumping up against. And you sort of put them in buckets, right? So he's in that 2-year bucket, so you sort of look at it, and you say, okay, there's other guys on there, like Jonathan Taylor, for example, has 3 years left of his contract, right? We sort of know where he's going to be, sort of what the general situation is going to be. If he gets hurt, he's not going to get right. He's not going to be playing on a 1-year deal, something like that. Whereas with Barkley, you sort of, I still think he's an elite asset, but you sort of are facing a little bit different of a clock. That year does make a difference, especially at running back. So I think it's going to be interesting. I think you'll get some. Right. And I think the evolving part of the market's interesting too, because in January, you still have recency bias. You still are feeling all the effects of this offseason, right? You're still feeling the effects of a Alvin Kamara historic performance, all of those things. In August, those things can look and feel a little bit different in terms of how we act on them. And one thing I would say is if you're making evaluations right now, I just had a conversation with a subscriber earlier this week, and it was, hey, what do you think about trading Devontae Adams? And I said, I just can't, I can't do that right now. I can't make an honest assessment because there's so much recency bias in my brain about what just happened that I can't trade a first round starter pick. If it's him, I can't really evaluate that trade right now. Let's take some time. Let's think about it. So but I don't think people are doing that, right? People now, trade deadlines are opening up and drafts are opening up and people aren't really aren't using their well-conditioned brain. They're just sort of acting, and that creates some opportunities. And so I think you could see a scenario where Barkley's going cheaper now than he will be in August, right? I think that's a situation that's possible.
Yeah. Barkley, I mean, the way you laid it out, that we're basically operating on 24 months of, what do we have? But he's in his prime, as you mentioned. I mean, 2 years, when you said he's basically locked in and he has 2 years of sort of, we know what we have here, contract wise. At running back landscape, that sounds pretty good. 2 years sounds pretty good. Outside of rookie contracts.
Not that many guys, really.
Not that many, especially, it's either rookie contracts or maybe someone that signs this, but frankly, I mean, who's going to be doling that out? And would they go out more than 2 years? I would say, in terms of, you cannot exit this and it's low dead money, however it's constructed. 5 years, $68 million. Well, it's really a 2-year construction. So all that other stuff is like team options and, all this built-in fluff that when they announce it, you always have to dig into the actual details. And we can talk about that more at free agent time, because that's going to be flying around for sure. But yeah, Barkley. But the other thing I was thinking of is when you were like, well, look at what he's done. He basically was a year after, Christian McCaffrey in terms of what arc is he on? And McCaffrey ended up being healthy and justifying that the next year, where Barkley did not. But in terms of starting their career, and then the other thing is, I mean, Barkley was considered in that class the bulletproof guy, right? It was like, well, you can't really take, who was the guy that went 1? I can't remember, but it was like you can't take a running back at 1, but it was like, should the Giants take Saquon Barkley, aka the best prospect of any position, or should they, go based on, team need? And well, you can't take a running back, the Mel Kiper stance of, that he just he would not take a round 1 running back. And that had nothing to do with, how good is Saquon Barkley. So Saquon Barkley, I mean, talent wise, and I mean, everything that I've looked at, whether it's my eyes or on spreadsheets, is the peak season is coming. Now, is the peak season running back 1 overall and like he goes away with the position? Is peak season for him running back 3? There 5. There's degrees here of what that means, but he's in his prime and he's had a little bit of his legs taken out in terms of opportunities for that. But it feels like it's coming. Is it 21 or is it 22? And those are the most likely years to make that happen. And part of it is situation has been sneaky. That doesn't really affect running back as much. But you would say if he was in a situation where he gets overt touchdown opportunities, in addition to everything else he does well, now you're really cooking with something. So he has that. He can make you look silly. Like if you're trading away, and we had so it's a very tenuous spot, right? I mean, for folks that were in season, you had to have a small population of packages or players to trade Barkley away this year. Now, obviously, you're going from 0 to something to help you this year. But if you make a deal like, and now you fast forward, because you said August is a different discussion than ending of the season. Everything's fresh now. But if you didn't win the title and you traded Barkley for something that wasn't elite and that didn't help you this year, then that's the type of dynasty deal that you end up regretting. Because now you get to the next healthy point for Barkley. Invariably, he'll be healthy at some point. And now you left that to move to something else that's in the past and didn't help you. So he's the type that can make you look silly for trading him away. And it feels like, now I'm not sure if that's what I would do with a team build. Like, would I take him at 112 of a startup draft? You have a lot of flexibility with 112 the pick. Beyond players, there's trading packages and sliding down a lot or a little and all these other things. So we always have to clarify, team building from a startup draft is different than, I have Saquon Barkley on this team, what should I do? So those are different discussion points, and just it's always good to put that in there.
Yeah. What's the latest you could see Barkley going?
Let me pull
in
up.
terms of the running back position. You think
well, you mentioned Taylor, and I think whether it's privately or on the show, we've had some discussions before about what does insulation look like? And Taylor, I think when we had that discussion, it was a little before this run of 3, 4, 5 weeks of him being, basically the guy and sort of what people probably expected coming out of week 1 with Marlon Mack's injury. So that to me is a big sticking point on, because Taylor, again, 21-year-old, now he logs for how I calculate a running back 1 season. And that, to finish, yeah, it's pretty good. And he was going to be one that I believe earlier in the season, he was fringe, like he was top 18, 20, 22, like he was in that range. And, so that's very good. You're checking the box. But when you get to running back 1 and you have more pedigree than someone like James Robinson, you're entering a new space of like expectations between floor and ceiling. So I think that's pretty interesting he's 3 years younger than Barkley. So and then like you said, with the recency of Alvin Kamara, we just talked about, the Saints situation. If that changes a little bit, how does that change? But he's going very high, I would expect, in round 1, and McCaffrey, same thing. So they're in a different zone of the draft, I feel. And I feel like Dalvin Cook, you expect him to go ahead of him as well, right?
Yeah, I think Dalvin Cook, and then honestly, I think you have the option for other guys too. I think you can see, Kamara up there. I've seen Cam Akers in the first round of drafts, which seems aggressive to me, but I think there's probably going to be a push for that.
Wasn't he around 4 or 5?
Yeah. Deandre Swift, I think has an argument for that. I don't think Dobbins does. I don't think Chubb does. So that's probably the universe of guys. I could see Derrick Henry maybe being up right there. Josh Jacobs has some supporters. I'm not sure the consensus is going to be there, but I'll say, like, just in terms of, I'm seeing some early startup drafts. Josh Jacobs at the end of the 3rd round. There's going to be some values there where it's almost like, do you have to take, again, we're kind of nitpicking, but do you have to take Barkley in some of the questions, or can you wait a couple of rounds and take something more certain there, and then wait a couple of rounds or trade down from that and just hammer what I think is going to be a historically lucrative 3rd, 4th, 5th round.
Yeah. And the other thing, I mentioned McCaffrey and Barkley, but one other thing on the running backs this year was a lot of the concern that, hey, with COVID, with no really off season, a lot of virtual stuff, no preseason, training camp looked a lot different, all these things. And yet rookie running backs were largely unaffected. You really had a typical kind of ramp up, and between Taylor and Gibson and Swift and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, they were all in the top 24 this year, and they had strong cross sections of the season as starters. And you had others, so those were the kind of more expected guys. You had Robinson, as a mid running back 1, that again wasn't a guy that people were counting on with a meaningful pick, but pretty much like all the top guys, had cross sections and came home. Akers had a cross section that you say, I was starting him strongly, and outside of that most recent injury, he could have been that playoff impact guy as well as a drove of the others. So they really weren't affected. Like, oh, this 2020 is a different type of season. And for running backs, that really wasn't the case. And that's what makes a lot of this. You mentioned the depth early on and say, is 1st round really different than 3rd round? And these rookie running backs that are 21, 22 years old, doing what they've done so far, supplementing the position and all the positions, because running backs are going to go. And wide receiver, you might be looking and say there's a lot of sameness. So it sets up a really interesting dynamic to where, young wide receivers, it's like 3 months ago, you might have said, oh, they're all going high. Well, they can't all go high. There's only 36 spots in 3 rounds, and some guys are going to fall out of it just by attrition. So I just think all these running backs of a good class on their own various levels, and goodness sakes, I mean, if Aj Dillon turns into a thing with some sort of run in the playoffs or whatever, or the moment they don't bring back Aaron Jones or something like that occurs, he's going to be right up there and rounds and rounds higher than he was at any point of startup drafts dating back to last January and on through.
Yeah, that rise, right? That huge uptick in valuation. I'll say, as a big Aj Dillon supporter, the seeing him this week and how he played and how they used him, I think that's a great sign in terms of, hey, let's get a reveal on him. With the COVID stuff and slow start and all that stuff, right? We didn't really know, right? We had a good feeling about what he was as a player. We didn't really know what they thought. And now that we sort of know what they thought, I think that might reshape the Aaron Jones contract situation. And are they going to
all the guys that have been out for COVID? He's one of the longest. I mean, obviously, Raquel Armstead is the longest. We just have not seen or heard from him. But reports are, I mean, Dillon was out more than a month, and reports were it really hit him.
And he said as much, right?
And and the fact that he came back, now he's back, and he got 20 plus touches, and you kind of feel like he's ready for the stretch run. Could this have happened earlier? Yes, but the fact that it's here now, it's almost immaterial, right? I mean, the arrival is the arrival, even if the bus is late, quote unquote late. I mean, you'd rather have the bus show up as opposed to not at all. And I was actually trying to look up because there's a new. Did you see the new Twitter account? It's like Aj Dillon's thighs, Aj Dillon's legs. That's what it is. It's just a picture of his leg, a picture of a. By the way, it's Northern California. That looks like a California redwood. but yeah, I mean, just let's go back. Remember the off-season pictures of Aj Dillon's legs, and it's like, have you seen this guy? Like he's built from something else. He's not human. And I think to some degree we saw that in one game, like it. And that's the thing. If you go for upside, it doesn't take much opportunity to have some sort of perfect storm. And the perfect storm was no Jamal Williams and in a snowy environment where they could just take the will out of Tennessee's horrible defense and say, oh, you like to do power running? Here's our impression as we're up by 3 touchdowns. How do you like that going right into your face? That's kind of the feel of that game. But yeah, it feels like, I mean, they could do this in the playoffs. I mean, they could get up a little bit, and now it's kind of not fair, right? I mean, they can gut you down the field with Aaron Rodgers doing his thing, and then they go, oh, now we'll just go power. Now we'll just go power. Like they could go power for a whole drive and be like, oh, we'll run it 8-9 times. We'll get there eventually. But now we're going to impose our will, as opposed to, double moves, throwing back shoulders and throwing it into a window the size of a Crayola box, over some guy's shoulder pad to Devontae Adams. We can go down the field in 3-4 plays, or we could do this and take 8 minutes off the clock. Yeah. So it feels unfair that they could do that either way now, and they've really drafted for the future. And I know a lot of people still are going to pick on them with Dillon's pick and Jordan Love's and etc. But what always perks me up, and I'll say this 3-4 times a year, is when teams draft a position they don't need. It perks my. To me, it's team-wise interesting, and I always say they must really like the player. I'm not saying Jordan Love's going to be great. What I'm saying is it's officially interesting, and Dillon was one of those fascinating, interesting picks to me. Kind of like Alvin Kamara, right? I mean, Kamara was not a need pick. They go, oh, we want that guy, but we were loaded at the time. But you know what? It helps our team to have great players, and I would agree in all cases that when it works out like that.
Yeah, totally. I'll say too.
Let me ask one thing just to finish up on Dillon. So, what do you think is the upside if he does not have another game like this? 20 plus touches, multi-touchdown. Let's say he's just in the mix. Let's say he is the third guy. Jamal Williams comes back and it's like, oh, rookie, like, hey, this is a serious playoff push. We got other guys right now. So if that occurs for the duration of their season, what do you think the upside of Aj Dillon before we get free agent clarity with Aaron Jones? What do you think the upside of him going in drafts is?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty about it. So that would be I think maybe somewhere in the 20s would be the upside of it. If Aaron Jones walks, I I think he's going to push top 15.
Right. At running back, just to clarify.
Yeah, at top 15. Yeah, top 15 at running back.
Which could get him into the Mixon, Sanders, previously where Aaron Jones could have been. David Montgomery. Does that sound about that type of zone?
Yeah, and honestly, at that point, right, you talk about insulation, right? He'll have 3 years. Those other guys are more on a 2-year track.
But Aaron Rodgers, his insulation is almost none. So
I'll say the thing about the thing that just 2 pieces of information that really caught my attention in the past 2 weeks with regards to this team. Aaron Rodgers, after I believe it was 2 weeks ago, was asked, what do you think about playing home field advantage, basically through the playoffs in Green Bay? And it was like cold that night, and he's like, when it gets real cold here, like that's what we want. Like we want it to get real, real cold. And then what happens the next week? It's snowy, it's cold, and like they roll with Aj Dillon, and I'm like, huh. You kind of like that's the additional element, right? Like that's sort of how we're, you talk about the imposing your will, which is kind of what they did, right? So, it was interesting when Rodgers said that, and then to see what actually happened when it got that, it's pretty exciting. So, big Aj Dillon fan. I will note though that the play that really stuck out, him jumping up there, the big ups to the guy that basically bench pressed him into the stands. That was an impressive feat there, getting him up there. He's a big boy. But he caught a ball down at his ankles on the move, like out in the flat. And I was just like, woof, who's the fullback? I was like, who's number 8, the 28, the fullback for Green Bay, who just got the ball in the flat?
Well, also, you see when he picked up the blitz on one occasion, like he didn't even move. He didn't move backwards. There was no anchoring. He was there, and the other guy was just like, oh, okay, like
a fly.
He ran into. He's like, maybe we don't call blitz. Maybe we run, stunts, or maybe try to get me free because I'm not going through this dude. It's a literal brick wall there. And I was going to point out, for folks that think or thought that he was going to be a 2-down banger and just so limited as a receiver. And that's why a lot of my analysis, and I started blending a few years ago, is running back only market share as well as raw production, because you get some of these programs that, what do we really want to know? We want to know if your team in college trusted you to be the pass catching guy, whether they get eight receptions for the year or 100. Yeah, 100's better. But when you encapsulate both things, and I think that's why it's important to blend raw production with some sort of market share, whether that's by position or aggregate for the team, that's when you can see, when a running back is the primary pass catcher, especially earlier on, the younger the better. DeAndre Swift is a glaring example of that. 18 years old, freshman at Georgia. What is he? They got a bunch of talent there. They had Chubb and Michelle and all these guys. And they go, no, that's the guy who's going to be catching passes for us. That's our plan A out of the backfield, is DeAndre Swift, just a freshman at that time. And Aj Dillon, again, Boston College doesn't throw the ball to the running backs a lot. To be fair, they're not a great passing team. But when they did, his market share was strong. And that's when you can say, well, that just may not be the scheme. That may not be the offensive design. It's not like Memphis or some of these other teams. They throw the ball to running backs a ton. Washington State, a ton. So you need to keep that in perspective and don't just say he's supersized, therefore he cannot catch the ball. I mean, I think he could be middle of the pack, maybe even better in the hierarchy of NFL running backs, because you're talking about a guy that, I think with a big back, your biggest concern is the start-stop factor. And Derrick Henry, the thing that you see with him is if he has to stop his feet, and a lot of times on a swing route or an outlet, the feet are stopped. So for him to get back up to speed with long legs, long strides, and that's why that buildup, it's almost like Adrian Peterson. It's the same reason he's kind of struggled as a receiver, in my opinion, over the years, and especially the last few, is that the feet stop. And he's used to that 5, 6, 7 yards of acceleration from the backfield to just get up to speed, and now it's good luck, and that's when he's at his strength. But Aj Dillon has a little more get up and go in the first couple steps that I don't think he's going to have that I'm stuck in quicksand, here I caught the ball, and now just come and get me. And it's completely different than if I'm coming from the backfield. So very good, very timely. But yeah, I think that I think that that's important that folks realize he has, like you mentioned, a low grab. We're just seeing just a little bit, but to consider him some 2-down thumper, like he's got to score 15 touchdowns to be viable fantasy wise, I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah. What do you think about receiver? Like, do you see any big things, any big storylines you're looking at receiver heading into the offseason, whether it's startup draft, free agency, anything like that?
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest thing for me is going to be how much are people going to go towards the incomplete or short profiles versus the long ones? Because we've got a lot of, say, 25 to 29-year-old strong profiles. And are people globally going to pass within these tiers? Are people going to globally pass for the young guys that have done it for part of a season, one season, maybe less than that? Because those can be obviously highly rewarding. I mean, those are guys that still have untapped potential. Or are you going to be building your team for yourself, a blended approach, and getting some of these 26, 27, 28-year-olds that they're going to be staring. If you are looking for that, I mean, I have never seen this, Jordan, where like I go into a draft, like since 2014, I remember it was like the stock line for Chad was always like, well, you grab 3-4 wide receivers and then you can move on with your draft. Like that's what you do. And this year feels like you can do the opposite. Like if you don't have a wide receiver through 3 or 4 rounds, I still think you're perfectly okay. I think you're still going to have really good choices that some of these sagging rookie profiles that, again, only so many of them are going to go so high. And then you're also going to have these veterans that are going cheaper than they've ever gone before for valid, not valid, various reasons that I think is going to create an environment where if people start moving over towards rookie picks or rookies once they're in the database for your platform and draft, when those things start occurring in the mid rounds and you still have sturdy profiles and it's not like you're drafting a 30, 32, 33-year-old, that's when I think you're going to sort of define your draft and define what kind of drafter you are.
Yeah. What do you think about, like, I just keep looking at this. There's so many, you can sort of build your own map in terms of profiles, right? And I really think this year is a type. And some of the guys that are free agents are actually going to fall into this. So it's going to make it even more interesting. Guys like Allen Robinson. But those mid-20s guys who are sort of established, we know what they are. They're not old, right? They're sort of mid-career, and they're not super attractive, right? They're not the next pretty girl or, the next pretty guy, the new guy or whatever. Right? They're kind of old reliable at this point. It's like your Diggs, your Coopers, right? Your Allen Robinsons, DJ Moore to some degree, right? How do they fit in, and what does a draft plan look like with them, right? When you sort of say, hey, listen, we're going to sort of fade the really expensive DK Metcalf and come down a little bit and, sort of hammer that range in terms of we just know more about them, right? And we have a better understanding of who they are as a player. And not that we don't think DK Metcalf can't be good, but we just know more about the career arc of these other guys at this point, and there's more uncertainty, and you don't really want to miss that early in a draft. And if you sort of do that, I think there's this. Usually, it's old or young, right? I think this year there's this really interesting middle ground of guys that I think at their prices too can be really, really attractive.
Yeah, because I'm looking right here. I mean, who's truly old for the position? Like that is still considered high upside, viable. And to me, there's only 2 guys I'm seeing that are 29 or older, and that's Adam Thielen and Julio Jones. And yet I would expect both of them to be really cheap, right? I mean, Julio Jones was what, last year, round 3-4? Does that sound right? And this year, I would expect it to drop at least 2 or 3 rounds with how he finished, aka didn't. And, and now people are going to be wondering if, is he going to fade completely? Is he going to go all the way back? Does he have 2 or 3 more years in him? Is it more of a year-to-year, 1-year play? That's going to determine it. And also who's surrounding him, because I can see the argument for Julio Jones or against him because it's such a viable range. So if you're getting someone, he's an all-timer. But if you're saying I'm drafting a 32-year-old guy, the next time he's going to play for me, and then I can also get someone that's 27, 28 that not, few can stack up to Julio, but I'm getting 4 years younger. I'm getting a guy probably less beat up, in terms of I mean, the chronic, the lingering, rest days and, missed games and all these things that we've been dealing with Julio Jones of when he plays, boom, awesome. When he doesn't play, when he's dinged up, not so much. So, and the ambiguity of when is he going to play and the status of questionable over and over and over again with him is going to be one that I think will take a toll in drafts this coming year. But those are the only two guys that I see offhand that are quote unquote old. Like if you want to be, I mean, the people that are liberal, and to me it's a little nutty, is when people want to call Michael Thomas, or if anyone wants to call Devontae Adams, at 28 next year, old, or Keenan Allen's Mike Evans too. But Keenan Allen's probably going to get the treatment, right? Yeah. Being 28 into 29, but doesn't he look like the exact profile of a guy that like is going to age gracefully?
Yeah, with a pretty good quarterback there too.
He's going to be turning guys around. Yeah. He's going to be turning around guys a decade younger than him, with his routes, and it just seems like he's going to be the type that, if there is one, that he's used to winning. I mean, he didn't even he ran like 4.6 something or 4.7, did he not? Like he bombed his workout coming into the NFL, and yet hasn't hindered him. He's the guy that scoffed at his Madden athleticism or speed or whatever. But anyway, like I just think there's so many guys like that. It really is a great state for running backs and wide receivers where you can go young, you can go older, and there's a lot right in the middle that it really, and I think here's one final thought for me is that I think it's going to be a startup draft season where, number one, I think you have to extend. I've talked about the core level of like the first 6 rounds or so, or the first 8 rounds of Superflex or quarterback premium. I think you're going to have to extend that this year of grading yourself. I think it's going to go to 9 or 10 rounds because there's a lot more on the, on the berry patch that you're going to pick off. That it's going to be more viable for longer than you're used to. And so therefore you need to do this is core level players and assets we're drafting. That needs to extend as well. And what is that going to do? That means you're going to look around your league and go, there's a bunch of teams that did pretty well, but it's going to be about, can you do really well? And it's going to be about insulating yourself that the misses are going to stand out even more this year. If you took the dynamite and you bombed on 2 of your first 4 picks, and we could have different definitions. I don't have a solid one, but if you draft a guy in the 2nd round and he's going 6th round the next year, and it's not even if it's a veteran like Julio Jones, I mean, that still is a loss. That still is a huge drop from a player that you should have gotten more equity and a bigger discount to make that investment. If it purely is age and they had a little bit of a down year and boom, 40, 50 picks later. But if you're whiffing by multiple 2, 3, 4 rounds with 2 of your top 4 picks, that's going to be tough for you to overcome in this climate because there's a lot of low hanging fruit. There's a lot to get right, in my opinion. So I feel like it's going to be one of those years where you really have to identify well this is not good process. This is not good value for this type of profile in the first 4, 5, 6 rounds because there's going to be a lot that makes really good sense.
Yeah. Over under January 15th, you start your first startup draft.
I already got a little side eye, Jordan. I'm already taking a little look-see. It's going to be hard. I will say, as someone who's in a lot of leagues, you are as well. It's about, you want the right fit. You want, what am I looking for in the draft? What am I looking for in the league? Because you're in lots of leagues, so you're in of a wide variety. Is there something that you want to try? What my stick point is always, if there's something I really want to try, I want someone else to be the commissioner because I know I can create my own in my mind's eye. I did that once or twice this past off season. I love those leagues, but if you keep doing that, the commissioner stuff, I don't know. Some people commission a lot of leagues, and yeoman's work, much appreciation and props. But being a commissioner of like 8 leagues or 10 leagues isn't going to be my thing ever. Mm-hmm. So even if it's lower maintenance, I don't care. Still, when you get ready for the playoffs and you have to manage the rookie draft and set count. I didn't say it's 50 hours a year, but what I just don't like it. I prefer to be one that snarkily says things in the league, and I run my own team and I can kind of do my own thing as opposed to worrying about the health and longevity of the entire thing. But yeah, January 15th, that's a good line. I'll say Well, I've already said this. Like, I have to finish my season-ending, data crunching and resculpt player values, shift ahead to 2021. I got to get all the 1.0, rookie rankings and all that kind of stuff. So I promise you, pledging to all listeners and people that want to hold me accountable, I won't join one until all that is accomplished. And so it can't be in the next 7 to 10 days. So we're going to get close to January 15th, though. That's a pretty good line. Actually starting the draft or just joining the league?
Joining the league.
Yeah, I'll say this. I'll probably join one by then.
Okay. All right.
I'll probably join.
But you think the over on actual picks is what you're saying? Yeah,
like I don't think it would actually, the draft would start and I would make a pick, or 101 would have picked, or whatever it is. Okay. Yeah. What about you? What's your itch level of, like, your tingly start going about seeing some things that could be observations and realities of the market and being like, feels like a potentially profitable scenario we got going here in 2021?
Yeah, I'm sort of like you. I want to digest it a little bit and do some analysis, look at some different things. I could see myself starting like February 1. I could see myself starting
before NFL free agency is a critical moment. And the other thing I would share, we could actually probably coming up the next week or two, do something about startup drafts where we kind of look at maybe the different decisions you'll have to make about what types of leagues or things that could be involved with that, and also the different types of the times of the season in the off season of what is going to be more conducive to you. Do you want more information? Do you want less? What types of things and features of the atmosphere of NFL player value would you want? And if you're only going to join one league this year, you want to be very specific about when you join and make sure that's a right fit for you too. So that would be a good topic coming up as, again, we are turning the page to startup draft in 2021 season overall. Do want to remind you to subscribe, rate, and review podcasting platforms. Sign up for that Football Guys daily email update. You're still going to get from Joe Bryant everything you need on a daily basis, all the way through the Super Bowl, a little bit of a hiatus. But if you stay subscribed right when they come back, it's right around draft season there. And then again, the push all the way to week 1. You don't want to be left out with the information, whether you're on Twitter, other social media, or whatever your method is. This is a fail safe. You're going to learn something every single time. You're going to get links to all the news items plus analysis. And again, it's going to be your Cliff Notes version to what happened today. What's going on today. And NFL playoffs do shift what happens in dynasty leagues as well. So the player value shifts are not finished until NFL free agency. They're going to still go through January and early February with, like you mentioned, recency bias. So in this episode, again, we discussed about some of the storylines that are coming out of 2020 season for us. Jordan McNamara and myself, Chad Parsons. Good luck in your dynasty leagues.